Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Today we want to wrap up our stop at the 2013 North Central Oklahoma Research Station Wheat Tour at Lahoma with advice on nitrogen and cover crops. Thinking drought would likely continue, Oklahoma State University graduate student Kevin Meeks planted cover crops at the Lahoma Research Station as a backup plan. Turns out the wheat grew tall with the help of healthy rains.
The wheat kind of choked out my cover crops. They're still in there, but now we've kind of gone to a relay cropping system situation. So we're gonna harvest the wheat, and then we're gonna see kind of what, if there was any influence of the cover crop interseeded after the wheat planted in March. After we harvest the wheat, then we have that nice forage out there from the spring cover crops, and so producers could, graze, cut it and bale it. So there's a little added income with not a whole lot of expense.
Extension Soil and Water Conservation Specialist Jason Warren says more producers are looking to cover crops.
Here in the last couple of years, there's been a gained interest in cover crops, and we've done a little bit of work, but not a lot. Last year we had some cover crops out in western Oklahoma near Gary, and of course, like most of our summer crops, they didn't do so well. But we learned a lot of things about soil water use, because they're going to use water, and we need to be able to replenish that in the fall if we're going back to wheat. And one thing, if you're going to do a summer cover crop in a wheat rotation, a continuous wheat system or a wheat canola system, you might want to try it on some of your sandier ground instead of your real heavy clay ground or silty clay loam type stuff, because those heavier soils, they take more water to recharge them and to replenish that water. And it's the same thing if you're growing a grain crop in the summer and you're wanting to go back to something in the fall. That heavier ground is going to take more water to replenish. So the cover crops can provide the residue. If you have a situation where you don't have a lot of residue in your no-till system, they can then hold on to it better. But again, they use water, and so you've got to be able to replace it and just be thoughtful about that.
If you're seriously thinking about cover crops, there are a few things to consider first.
Well, is you need to know what your intent or interest is. So if you're interested in producing nitrogen with a cover crop, of course you want to go with legume. Cowpeas or mung beans are very common in Oklahoma. They're coming along with sun hemp as kind of a new species that grows a lot of biomass under the right conditions, but it's a fairly resistant crop to decomposition compared to, say, cowpeas, but it will provide some soil structure and soil character improvements that cowpeas won't, because it's a much more heavier rooted crop. It can penetrate more dense soil, and so if your interest is to produce nitrogen as well as improve soil health or quality, then you might want to go with a sun hemp. But if your interest is primarily to gain back residue, you might go with the grass like millet or forage sorghum. You want to make sure that you know why you're doing it and what you want to achieve with it.
Meantime, OSU's cover crop research is ongoing.
The same study without the wheat part is going on at Perkins right now. And it's a rotational study where I planted these same cover crops, and in the summer, I'll plant sorghum and soybeans behind the cover crop. And so if there's any yield differences after a certain cover crop, we might be able to see. And we also took soil moisture measurements as well. So last summer it didn't turn out so well because nothing turned out very well last summer for us. But hopefully in the second year we might see some different results.
And we're here with Brian Arnall. Brian, what did you talk with producers about today here at the Lahoma Field Day?
So we really did a nitrogen 101, the basics of nitrogen management and how we come up with some of those recommendations. So we started off the day with discussing the Stanford equation. It sounds like this complicated thing, but it really comes down to three really basic components on where does that N rate come from. It goes from having the knowledge of the nitrogen removed by the crop minus what's supplied by the soil. And then the last part is you take that little bit and divide it by the efficiency that you expect the nitrogen is going to be. So do you think 50% of it's going to be in the crop, 60%, and that gets a rate? That's really where our 2 pounds of N per bushel came from.
Okay.
We look at crop removal and the efficiency of which we're going to get that nitrogen into the crop. And then we use soil testing to tell us what the residual soil is going to be. But if we think about those three components are really not that easy to predict or understand.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. Is there an easier way to manage that?
Yeah, one of the newer concepts or approaches to thinking about nitrogen management that we're promoting more and more is called the 4 R's. The 4 R's of nutrient management are: we want it in the right place, at the right time, at the right rate, using the right source. And so what I talk to producers about is that the goal in nutrient management should be hitting all 4 of those keys. Now, if you're planning it out the first of the year, that's great. If you can actually achieve getting close to 3 of those, you'll probably have a really good year on nitrogen management or nutrient management.
Right.
If you get all 4, it's superb. Now, if we think about all those 4 independently and talk about a little bit about each of those, let's start with source. And so that would be, we talk of our sources: anhydrous ammonia, urea, liquid nitrogen, ammonium nitrate. All those sources have their times and their components which are going to be more efficient than the others. Urea applied and incorporated is quite efficient fertilizer. However, if you talk about urea applied in the spring when it's humid, windy, and temperatures are hot, there's a high likelihood of loss if it doesn't get rained in or is incorporated. Anhydrous is a good source up front because it's in the soil, so if you get nitrogen in the soil, it will be better, but it's harder to apply. The equipment's more expensive to apply it in season. Ammonium nitrate is a phenomenal source of nitrogen, especially for in-season or springtime applications. However, there's some complications in getting it just due to its history and the problems we may have it on storage and cells. Then we talk about timing. On winter wheat, typically we could put everything up front in the summer, on all the nitrogen up front in the summer, but that gives an entire period to be lost. If we have a heavy rainfall fall in winter, we have a chance of losing a great deal of that. Plus, we don't know what the yield's going to be. Right. So if we delay that to a top dress, our efficiencies will be better on what's applied, and we have a better idea of what would be needed. Then we get into the placement, and especially if we talk about top dress placement. Right. If you could put that nitrogen into the soil, either through injection or what be it, it is better. But you have to go beyond that because not everybody can inject nitrogen. So we have, if we're talking about a liquid application, if you're applying UAN on a field in February, January, especially no-till field, and you don't have that much leaf coverage, a flat fan nitrogen rate is not a good option because it's going to get on that stover and there's a good chance it could be tied up. So how you apply, when you apply, and what source you use. And then in the end, we come to nitrogen rate. That is still important. Soil testing will give you a great upfront concept of what you have in the soil at the time, give you a better idea of rate. Then when we come to in season, as wheat prices go up, fertilizer prices go up, we're going to have more and more thought of doing in-season soil testing for nitrogen. It's a cheap lab method. $6 the soil testing lab can tell you nitrogen for in season, adjust that. And of course, if you guys have talked with me countless of times, the enriched strip and green seeker. Right. It's a great method to get the rate right.
Okay, so that's like everything you wanted to know about nitrogen application, but we're too afraid to ask.
That is nitrogen 101. that is a semester of nitrogen boiled down in a minute or two.
There you go. Brian Ernall with Oklahoma State University.
Hi, I'm Al Sutherland with your Mesonet weather report. May 2013, what a month for weather in Oklahoma. Deadly tornadoes, a late damaging freeze, and rain, rain, rain. Our thoughts and prayers and giving continue to reach out to those suffering from the recent severe weather events. While not as sudden, folks in western Oklahoma are suffering from a continuing severe drought. For the last 30 days through Wednesday afternoon, June 5th, the rainfall in the western sections of Oklahoma hovered between 3/4 of an inch and 2 inches. The yellow and tan areas on the west side of the state had from 2.5 to 4 inches of rain. Moving east, the areas colored bright and dark purple saw 8 or more inches of rain. The highest 30-day rainfall for a Mesonet site was 16 47/100 recorded at Oklahoma City East. As a percent of normal rainfall, the blue areas had close to twice their normal May rainfall. The pale green areas were in the middle, close to normal. The bright orange and red areas had 40% of normal or less. Looking back 60 days from June 5th, Oklahoma City shows up as a blue circle, twice their normal rainfall. The bright green colored areas were at 120 to 160% of normal. The bright orange and red colored areas had a measly 40% or less of their normal rainfall. For the current water year that began on October 1st, there are only a few green colored areas that come in above normal. The olive area in central and eastern Oklahoma received between 80 and 100% of normal. The yellow areas are between 60 and 80% of normal. The orange areas 40 to 60% of normal. So as we look back to the beginning of fall, through the winter and spring, the western quarter of Oklahoma continues to suffer, now beginning their third summer growing season with extremely low rainfall and growing concerns about water supplies. The break between the wetter east and the drier west really shows up in a map of plant available water from the surface down to 16 inches. The brown areas in the west have low numbers below an inch. Moving east, the numbers pop up close to or above 4 inches of water available for plants, the green areas in the map. Warmer temperatures go with drier conditions, and the drier western parts of the state have seen a number of days at 90 degrees or more. Altus in the dark red areas had 20. The count for most locations in the red areas are in the teens. No complaints from folks in the eastern side of the state about heat. The zeros on the map in the cream color means their hottest days have only been in the 80s. Along with the tragic storms, May brought a lot of welcome rain to areas across the state. Hopefully, June will see heavier rains in western Oklahoma. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Mesonet Weather Report.
Well, we've had a few weeks of good rains now, but it's really not time to quit talking about drought. Daryl Peel, our livestock marketing specialist. Daryl, here in Oklahoma, we do still have some drought concerns.
That's exactly right. You know, we've seen a lot of improvement in sort of the eastern 2/3 of the state. Certainly in the last couple of weeks, we've had some very heavy rains that have not only given us moisture to replenish, soil moisture as well, but also we've had the kind of rains that have really recharged surface water in most places. Our ponds are filled back up in an awful lot of that area. Nevertheless, the western third of the state is still in very serious drought. They've not received most of these rains. And, if you look at the drought monitor the last couple of weeks, the most serious drought conditions really haven't changed very much because they're in that area that has not shared in this so far.
All right, now what about the U.S. picture?
It's kind of the same story in the U.S. I mean, the drought that was there, say, 3 or 4 months ago has moved farther west, much like in Oklahoma. Eastern Kansas, eastern Nebraska are in somewhat better shape. The drought has been pushed farther west and a little bit more to the southwest. If you look across the states, clearly it's New Mexico that's bearing the brunt of the worst conditions now. Those extend up into southeastern Colorado, western Kansas, and up into southwestern and western Nebraska.
Okay, so all that in mind, how does the forage and hay picture look as we head into summer?
Well, I think, in terms of moisture conditions, we're improved. We've got more potential now, but we really haven't had the warm weather even yet, even though we haven't had the unusually cold weather that we had, but cooler weather has continued. And so we really haven't seen forage growth yet. I think we're probably behind on both hay and pasture production in the areas where we rely on our warm season, particularly introduced pastures. Obviously, range conditions, pasture conditions are still very severe in those drought areas. New Mexico, for example, 92% of the entire state range areas are in poor to very poor condition right now. So we still have some serious forage challenges. I think on a nationwide basis, we're probably lagging a bit behind on hay production. And as we know, we had very tight hay stocks from the drought the last 2 years. So, we probably got a ways to go yet to recover that normal forage pipeline that we would normally have in this country.
What does that do for the markets then as we head into the summer?
Well, cattle markets right now are kind of trying to figure out what they're going to do seasonally. Summertime is usually a little bit softer time for both fed cattle and feeder cattle. Well, feeder cattle sometimes actually pick up in the summer, and we haven't seen that really happen yet. It may be just beginning to see the feeder cattle market pick up a little bit after the defensive mode it's been in for the last 2 or 3 months. Fed cattle are kind of just hanging in there right now, which is pretty good for this time of the year. We're near the seasonal peaks in slaughter. The box beef market, which set new records right before Memorial Day, is still, it's come down a little bit as expected, but it's still holding up pretty well at this point.
All right, good information as always. Darrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Many cow-calf operations like to have the replacement heifers bred just a few weeks ahead of most of the cow herd, and that gives those heifers then a few extra days between their calving next spring and when they have to recycle to rebreed for subsequent calf crops. That means that the breeding season for this year's replacement heifers should be winding down, because if we started in mid-April and have a 45 to 60 day breeding season for those heifers, then that should be concluding here in the mid part of June. I think that means it's a good time to visit with your veterinarian and schedule to have those replacement heifers pregnancy checked. If there's any group of cattle on the operation that I'm firmly convinced we must pregnancy check them, it's those replacement heifers. Research tells us that if they don't get bred in that first go-around, that first breeding season, chances are they're going to be difficult to get bred the rest of their lifetime. So this is a good time to identify those that didn't conceive in that first breeding season and cull them. And we want to cull them early so that they're still young enough that they can go into a feedlot and eventually be fed out and become choice beef. If we wait until next spring and find out that some of these heifers didn't calve, then we have a 2-year-old that is open and is going to bring considerably less money. Plus, we have spent the grass this summer and the feed next winter raising that heifer. So I just think that it makes really good sense to have these heifers pregnancy checked, identify those that didn't get bred in this first breeding season. It'll help our cow herd for years to come and certainly save us a few dollars as we go through this winter's feeding season. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Kim Anderson, our grain marketing specialist, joins us now. And Kim, this time of year, producers thinking about the wheat that they're going to harvest, and they have two big questions. Should I store or should I sell?
And the answer is yes. Given the volatility in the market and in that we can't predict prices, I think they need to sell some at harvest and then store some to sell later in the crop year and probably have it sold by January 1. I think this year, the price situation, that we probably should sell a higher percentage at harvest than we normally sell.
Okay. And how have prices over the past few years impacted your perspective on that?
Well, as you know, prices have been very volatile. You know, the average daily price move is 11 cents. It's nothing to have a 20 or 25 cent price move. The prices often move opposite the direction we expect them to do. And it's just solidified my thought that you cannot predict prices.
Okay, and then what's the supply and demand picture then?
Well, if you look at the supply and demand, we've got adequate amounts of wheat. The supply is slightly below average. I think the big price factor for wheat, and probably will be so until we get out into the August-September time period, is the shortage of feedstocks and the feed market buying wheat and moving it into that market out of the food market.
And how are prices looking right now?
Well, if you look at the current prices, anywhere in Oklahoma from $7.20 to $7.40, somewhere in that range. The 5-year average is $6.40, so we're about 80 cents to a dollar above average, and that's another reason I think that you should sell a higher percentage at harvest.
And we're rounding out the first week of June. Final word of advice for Oklahoma farmers?
I think as they look at the market and the uncertainty in the market, they've got to decide, what does $7.30 mean to me? Is it better for me to hold and try to get a bigger price and have to take a lower one, or to sell and not have the opportunity to get a bigger price? I think dollar cost averaging, staggering the market, I think that's the way to market your crop.
Okay, Kim Anderson, we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Hi, welcome to Shop Stop. Do you ever have a problem with your torch popping when you're trying to cut metal or maybe do a little bit of welding?
Well, it actually could be several causes creating that problem. One of them can be, of course, your gas mixture is wrong. The second problem could be these O-rings that are on the ends of these torches and torch tips.
Yeah. Another problem might be maybe your connection is just not tight enough. You've got it, haven't got it pulled down, but so usually, if we see that popping and we're worried about it, we're always looking at the tip because that's where it's happening, and it may actually be back at the connection back further down.
Correct. So yeah, if you look at these and you haven't changed your O-rings in a while on your torches, you may want to consider doing that. They're cheap, and you can get the kits from your local welding supply store. And then even things like this part being loose can create a problem like that. So make sure everything's good and tight and your seals are good, and that should help alleviate some of your popping problems if your mixtures are right.
That's it this week on Shop Stop. We'll see you next time.
This week we visited Muskogee, Oklahoma to sit in on the Advanced Cow-Calf Boot Camp.
The participants to this program are actually graduates of our Cow-Calf Boot Camp. They're people who's either new to the beef industry or they're in the beef industry and they just want to learn more. They've attended our boot camp and we had such a great response from it that they've asked, they wanted to step further.
Oh, I just enjoy learning more about what I like, and just hopefully I can learn something that can help me with my operation and hopefully to help me make a little bit more money.
If you look at the beef industry as a whole, the biggest of our cattle come from small producers, and that's exactly what these people are. They're, less than 50 cows most likely, and if these people can't make it, then our beef industry structure is kind of volatile.
And so for these 3 intensive days, producers sit down with Oklahoma State University experts on soil fertility, genetics, EPDs, estate planning, livestock law, and much more.
So far, I'm getting ways to increase the production of forage, key element as far as raising cattle. They've got to eat. And I feel like getting my forage production increased is going to increase the production on my cattle. I was at the meeting a year ago, the initial cow camp, and the information I gleaned from there, I've applied several principles that have helped my operation.
Most of these producers, they're doing it because they enjoy it, but we also have to show them that it's business. I mean, if they can't make money at it, they better have a wife in town who understands that. So therefore, getting their mindset that it is a business, and even though we love seeing our cows out our front porch, we still need to make a profit at it.
If you'd like to learn more about Oklahoma State's cow-calf boot camps, visit our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
We've been getting a lot of calls from all over the state about all the cool season grasses that have come into Bermuda grass pastures, but mainly on the bigger ranches with native grass, and what's going on and why is it there. The reason these cool season annuals are in these pastures, number one, they're invasive. They're not native, but they've come in because we've been in a couple of years of drought. We've had a great year for winter rain, and that sets up a pasture for having a lot of these annuals. They exist out here as a seed source for many years, waiting for the right opportunity to come up. This pasture from the road looks really good, but when you get out here and look, it's full of cool season annuals. Now, it's an excellent native meadow, and the native grasses are coming up under here, but what you really have out here is a lot of annuals that are maturing right now. So the question is, what do you do with them? One option is to come out here and heavily graze this for a short period of time to get rid of these annuals and get rid of the seed source. Right now, these plants are maturing, the forage quality's dropped way off, and they're not very good to graze right now. A section option would be to come out and try to hay this. Again, these plants are probably too mature to be optimum quality, but could still provide quite a bit of hay. And again, you would get this material off this native hay meadow such that it can come up and the native plants can produce. You never want to cut a meadow more than once, and these native plants here are already up 5 to 6 inches. So if most people that cut native hay are going to cut it around July the 1st. Some people that don't understand native meadows will be trying to bale those out in the middle of July, even August or September, or they'll try to bale them twice. That's a guaranteed formula for failure, because if you cut those in that manner, you're going to pay for it next year. You really set those plants back and they don't do well. Another issue on cutting meadows that people overlook is cutting height. Our modern hay equipment will cut down very short, and you don't want to do that. You never want to cut more than 4 inches. If you go out into the first, second week of July, you need to cut it even higher. If you're cutting much past the 10th or 15th of July, you're going to hurt your meadow next year. And then you'd want to test this forage to make sure you understand the quality of the forage and how you'd want to feed that based on the analysis of the protein and other elements. If you don't have those options, you're just going to have to deal with this stuff growing in the pasture, and this is throwing down a huge amount of seed. And so the next time we have a wet winter, you're going to have this cool season material come back up in your pasture. If we'd had a whole lot of cattle this year, ideally we could have dumped a lot of cattle in here and flash grazed this for a few weeks and gotten this off here. The problem is, in most of the country, we don't have many cattle right now, so that wasn't really an option.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you next time at SUNUP.